Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and we're continuing our series of discussions with the candidates for City Councilor at Large. And this evening, our guest is Dr. Kenann McKenzie DeFranza. That's a mouthful. Jeez. Welcome, Kenann.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, you live in Beverly. You're a school teacher, I guess, or what?
Well, I am definitely an educator, although my day job, if you will, is I'm a professor of education.
Oh, okay.
And so I teach teacher candidates, but I also do a lot of work around policy and research and partnerships, and so everything around supporting education as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So you've been on the school committee for what?
4 years.
4 years,
Yes.
yeah. And now you're ready to move to the city council?
I believe so. I entered public service on the school committee really thinking that my expertise could help at a difficult time. We were in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I ended up feeling like it was a really great opportunity to also get to know more about the community.
Yeah.
I knew about education writ large, but certainly in the pandemic, so much was being thrown out. We had to come up with new ideas and be innovative. So I was really excited to do that. And of course, know the community much more now. One of the vantage points about being in our schools as a school committee member is that you get to see a lot wider view of what families and children are dealing with even outside of schools. Mm-hmm. And I think that those things impact our schools, but there are ways we can also support outside of school time that I'm really interested in.
Yeah. So what's your take on the city? Suppose you were a real estate agent, mm-hmm. and you were trying to sell a house to a couple. Mm-hmm. How would you describe Beverly to them?
Well, you know what? I used to be a real estate agent.
Oh, really?
That's not a part of my resume, but I was.
Oh.
I
well,
actually,
what did you say then? Yeah.
Go figure, right? I was a real estate agent when I lived in the DC area because I was a doctoral student at the time and I wanted to do something flexible, to be home with my kids. Yeah. And I actually, again, loved engaging with the public. And I thought, oh, this is wonderful. But then I learned a lot of interesting things about how this process of real estate and taxes and schools are really symbiotic. Yeah. And it actually drove a lot of my research passions about civic engagement and school reform. So that actually tied really nicely into my doctoral work without me even thinking that would happen. Yeah. So I would say Beverly, for me, thus far, I would be considered a relatively newcomer. Mm-hmm. But I feel like Beverly is an incredibly flexible place. We have found ways to be adaptable. I find that people, once you get to know them, especially if it's not the New England cold, they're really warm and they really want to get to know you. And they're trying to grapple with how to hold on to traditions, to celebrate the history of Beverly, but at the same time, acknowledge that we have shifts and changes that we have to adjust to. And I think people have generally been pretty engaged. I love where we live. I love the oceans. I love our green spaces. And, obviously, I see it also from the lens of a parent. And so I feel like we have a lot of people who are really invested in our young people in Beverly. So I love that. If I was a real estate agent, I would be playing up those factors. Mm-hmm. I think we also have small businesses here that do incredible work. There are obviously challenges, not just local to Beverly, around how they can really blossom and have a walkable downtown and a walkable community to support them. But they're all really important, and I try to get to know them and frequent them and be part of their ecosystem. Yeah. But I think we have a lot to offer, and I think we have a good balance of walkability, green space, and also just a lot of careful thinking about development that we're trying to do.
Well, what do you think is really working well in Beverly?
Well, what I think is working well is that we're trying to establish a lot of places where people can feel like that is their niche where they can be seen. We're rethinking things like our parks, so our young people have somewhere to be seen and heard and safe in public. We're rethinking things like accessibility, at our beaches, which I think is wonderful. We're thinking about how to support our small businesses. We have diversified the offerings and who you see and what you can do at our local events and activities and festivals. All of these things really matter because people want to feel like where they are is a place that's reliably well-functioning, has a place for them, and allows them to really engage with each other in a way that, feels like community. And so even when you have changes, it's really great to know that some things are going to be honored and valued and upheld, but you can also really think about how to keep being inclusive of different voices and concerns. And I think we keep trying to offer ways to do that. I know that because of the pandemic, we could see a lot more cities functioning online, watching their committee meetings and their different discussions. And I think even though we've had some hard public discussions, we have kept it open and we have kept it the case that the public can continue to engage with public officials. And I think that's really important.
So what could we be doing better then?
Well, to look at that as an educator, one of the things that I thought could be better is that after we leave high school, a lot of us really don't remember how a lot of these things work that we learn in civics or other types of mechanisms, right? And I felt like some of the ways that we engage as public servants could be better explained. Some of the procedures and policies that we're asked to uphold ethically or through formality could be better served by explaining to the public why we have certain formats, why we can or cannot respond in certain ways. That would help with some of the frustration that could happen. But I understand in the crux of all of it, when you're busy trying to make policy or try to make decisions, it may be challenging to take the time to explain process. And so one of the things I think could be helpful is to just build in ways that we periodically check for understanding, if you will. Are we clear about what we're doing and why? How can we make it simple for the public to follow the process? And I don't think that it's not happening more because someone doesn't value it or see that it could be helpful. It takes capacity, it takes the time and planning, and it also takes hearing the feedback from others about what they're not following, what they don't understand, and responding to that. And I think that there is an interest in doing that, but I think that's something I would love to champion and see us do more of.
Well, you've been out around gathering signatures to get your name on the ballot. And talking with people about sign here, please, what are they saying?
Thankfully, we are all done with the signature process, so that was great. What I'm hearing is that people are excited. I had a couple of questions. Some people said, well, I'm really sad if you're not going to be on school committee. Why are you making the shift?
Yeah.
And one of the things that occurred to me is that while I was on school committee, I was actually really excited to see how much engagement there was around schools in the last few months and thought there might be people who are interested now who weren't before, and I can make space for those people. In addition to that, wanting to be on the council is something that didn't immediately occur to me. I was actually encouraged by some constituents who weren't even in my ward who said, hey, I've seen you have these conversations and I'd be curious about, would you consider being on the council? And I thought about it because I feel like you need to be in public service because you want to serve the public. And I don't want to be in public service because I feel like I should be elected or someone owes me a seat or that some seat is mine forever. I feel like there needs to be a purpose. There needs to be a sense that it is a good addition and that people would value that. And so I took the advice and feedback from people who wanted to see me maybe speak to some larger issues. And I sat with it, talked to my family. And then I decided, that makes sense for me to do. But in those conversations with the signatures, there were a lot of people saying, I'm so happy to see that you're going to continue in public service. And is there a way you think that maybe education will be sort of more of a conversation publicly if you're on the council? And I think our council cares about education, but certainly being an educator and sitting on the council may have some benefits, I think, to making sure that our school system and district is clearly understood in terms of its functioning and also just more representation for what we're seeing in that space.
Well, this past year or so has been kind of contentious with a lot of difficult times. The teachers' strike was very debatable as to whether that should have happened or not. And part of the problem, I guess, was the teachers' salary structure got behind the surrounding community, so there's a bit of catch-up that they had to run through. And the organization of how that worked out into the budget and then the after effect, I think has left a lot of people somewhat concerned that where's the city going? And especially with several other major projects in the works. I don't know if the library is still in play or not, and City Hall and a few other major projects. Like you said, the city needs to keep the infrastructure up. So how do you think that's going to work out? How do you think you can contribute to that in this kind of an environment where we have a strong mayor and a supposedly weak city council?
I hadn't heard that, that there's a perception that there's a weak city council. I would say that, generally speaking, how I want to contribute to that is I believe in understanding really well. So I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning new things. I try to pay attention to the details and ask good questions. I don't expect that I'm going to have the answer to everything, but I do expect that I will be listening to understand all the perspectives to make informed suggestions and decisions. What I want to contribute is something that I hope helps to address some of what you just mentioned there. At no point do I believe or have I thought that our mayor, our school committee, our council, or our teachers meant ill will. We sit in positions in this society based on jobs we have, family structures, backgrounds, all of that. And we wear those lenses and we bring them to our conversations. On the school committee, knowing how closely I work with schools, I try to also be objective and think about things as a parent would. I have parents in Beverly, in public school who reach out to me. I'm also a parent of students. But I also try to think as a taxpayer, as somebody who owns a home and thinks about how much my taxes might go up or not. So you have to be able to step in and out of different perspectives and then ask hard questions. I think whenever you're asking the hard questions or having those discussions, being respectful and civil and kind and assuming best intentions is always a smart move. It's always where I go to. And it's not common that I will ask a series of hard questions because I try to do my homework and get the information. But sometimes it's necessary. And I think if we do that respectfully and kindly, we should be able to come back to each other after that as colleagues or as friends or as neighbors. And so I believe modeling that is going to be really important. I think acknowledging when people feel hurt or disrespected or any of those things is also important. It doesn't mean that they're right. It doesn't mean that someone is wrong, but it does mean that we come to these conversations with emotions, with backgrounds and perspectives. And so I think that listening is going to be really critical, and trying to do that with fellow council members who've had historical knowledge will be important. Paying attention to current meetings and future meetings is important. Should I be elected, which I would hope to be, it's going to be important for me to get a sense of what's been discussed, what's happened, what's the cadence. But I really believe that we choose public service because we care. And the way we want to go about it may be where we have a difference of opinion, but I don't think that should turn into animosity that's difficult to overcome. We're all trying to do something that's challenging. We have an environment where at many levels of government, we're seeing a shift in how monies are allocated. We have things we've tried to do in Massachusetts, in the Commonwealth, to address some of those things, and then other environmental things happen. So I would actually love to see us acknowledge that this issue locally really requires collective effort. It requires that we look to one another to partner and advocate for what we think we really need. And I understand that in the moment, it can seem like someone is not giving someone what they want or vice versa. But really, we know that the problem is greater than our local budget. And what we have to do is make very hard decisions locally about what is tenable at the moment, but what's actually worth continuing to fight for, despite what we know about the numbers. And I think offering ways to be creative about that, but also to be civil and to be good listeners about it is something that I really want to make sure that my presence would do.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's really showed up with the closing of the bridges, that it's a traumatic event to lots of people in Beverly. And at the same time, most of the action is well beyond what Beverly can do.
Yeah.
And we're dependent on the state and the federal levels to get approvals to do things. And I think this is one of the challenges that you're going to face and the city's going to face is how do you keep the population informed of what's going on and why it's going on?
Right.
And I think that's one of the important ingredients, because a lot of things come down as, well, this is the way it is. And somebody else says, well, it shouldn't be that way because I could do it a different way. And maybe they could, but maybe they don't understand what all the ingredients are and who all the players are. So I think the point you were making earlier about communicating with the public and the taxpayers especially is why this is happening and what's happening to our tax rate. And one of the other fun ones that I think gets to me is that every so often somebody will come out and complain that, oh, we've had a lower tax rate than we could have had because we only charge 1.1%, but it's the state says we can go 2.5%. And then I look at my tax bill, and over the last 10 years, it's gone up 4.5% a year. Oh, how did that happen? Well, we reassessed your property. And I think the little things like this don't get expressed. And people are wondering, look at that, that's more than 2.5% on my tax bill. So I think that you're making a point that there's a lot of room for significant improvement in the way things are discussed and passed around. And so we should kind of look with that. That's going to be a challenge. But
Yeah, I agree. It's a challenge I welcome. I am also a parent. I am somebody who, has a full schedule with the things I'm committed to. So I understand not wanting to overwhelm people with information or too often or too much. There's so much that we can potentially be distracted by online or other ways. So I think thinking carefully about how best to do it and how often to do it is going to be important. But what we don't want to do is, in a crisis, try to explain too much to people who may already be feeling overwhelmed or stressed. Yeah. And so how can we be proactive about some of these pieces? And again, the current folks we have in office, I believe, mean well and try to do that to the best of their ability. So I think if you are to add to the body, you need to think about, for me, for example, how can you add capacity to what it is we're trying to achieve as a city? And so it's not to critique the current structure because I'm not in it and I can't say why some things are happening or not, and I'm sure there are pretty good reasons. But my offer would be to build the capacity around how we can do that communication, the teaching, the education, and the outreach in a way that furthers our common goals so that I am helping those who are already serving rather than reinventing the wheel. But how can we further that message and how can I contribute to doing that?
Well, one of the big issues that's going to continue to come up is the cost of schools. And the settlement with the teachers union implies that they're going to have to get a bigger chunk of the city budget for several years to come until this schedule, I guess, their pay schedule gets compatible with the surrounding communities. So it's still playing a catch-up game. There's been talk around of doing an override, and I've been involved in a couple of them where they've had to very adamantly shut it down that, no, we don't want an override. So I guess the question comes down to is, where do you see the priorities in the city between maintaining the structure, rebuilding City Hall, more money to the school system, and there's going to be an awful lot of, my department needs more money all the way down the line.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And what's funny is that when you and I talked about setting up this interview, it was going to happen a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it happened today instead, which is after our budget vote. So I can speak to that a little bit, although prior I would not have wanted to, throw my opinion out there ahead of our discussion. And last night, it was a challenging conversation. We had an extended budget discussion, as you saw. We had a hearing, and then we decided to have another discussion to allow our superintendent to get us some more data. I think one of the challenges is that we know that for there to be no changes at all, it would be challenging to have such a budget. It would be too large. And so the superintendent has the difficult role of meeting with building leaders to find out what they think they essentially need. We also have to balance that with what we are hearing from our constituents and what we may know has occurred in the district with children and things like that. So as school committee members, our top role is children's advocacy. That's what our descriptor is. And so we have to think about what works for children, balancing that with the reality of fiscal responsibility. No one wants to endlessly keep asking taxpayers to keep raising and raising and raising, knowing that people have their own concerns, fixed incomes, and other things. And so we need to be careful about what we're asking for and how much, but we also need to balance that with real concerns, I think, about making sure our district is compliant, making sure our district is responsive to what we're seeing in our schools so that we can retain our educators, so that families have faith in our schools and that children feel like they have high quality experiences and they're safe and they're getting their services. That is a tough balancing act, and I do not disparage anyone who's been trying to do that at all. But I do have to ask questions about what really is essential. And that's how I hope we make more decisions. Like, what is the priority within our district to ensure certain things that must happen, and what might that cost? And so our body voted to pass the budget. And once we make a decision as a body, that is the body's decision. We are not to publicly disparage the decision or any of those things. But I at least can say that one of the reasons I had concern is because I know that specifically for special education, there are unique challenges and unique expenses that go with those programs running well. It doesn't mean that I think our programs are not going to run well now, but it does mean that for me personally, I feel like we need to have a very laser-like focus on what the impact could be for our budgetary changes. I also feel that if we know that we would prefer it be another way, or we think it might be better off served a different way, that we shouldn't lose the focus on advocating for and seeking out the resources. And it may not be the city budget that it comes from, but there is, I believe, some value in saying, you know what, there are many stakeholders who care about this, not just our public school leadership or not just our city council. Who are these people? Who are these groups? Can we create a coalition to make sure that no one falls through the cracks, particularly our most vulnerable students? And many of them would be classified in our special education population because they may also present with other challenges, whether they be mobile, mental health. They're often a population that unfortunately is more represented when it comes to being bullied or not having other kinds of social supports that they might need without these services. So that's why I raised that particular issue. But in general, I feel as though we need to make sure our priorities do, in fact, support all our residents. Not everyone has children in schools, and not everybody is connected to our schools. But our children really create the next generation of residents and leaders and the new people who will have businesses, we hope, in Beverly, and help our city stay strong and be able to afford to stay in Beverly. So they need a strong education to do that. And so I think that it does need to be a priority, but we need to make sure we're balancing that with the real other priorities of our city around infrastructure, around safety, around business development, and so forth and so on. So, I appreciate your question, and I would definitely say fiscally, I have appreciated that our city has weathered pretty well in the last several years because of some careful stewardship of our resources, and I don't think we should take that for granted either.
Okay. Well, we've come to the time where it's your turn to make your pitch to the audience about vote for me.
Well, I so appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit about why a switch to city council, should I be elected to city council. I dearly love education, but I dearly love broadly community, the spirit of community. And you might have noticed I've began to use a tagline, but I mean it sincerely. It's looking at collaboration, it's looking at communication and connection. And I think those three things are the pillars by which I would want to be a public servant. I see myself as a leader who really leads by listening and who leads by understanding what people need and being guided by that when it comes to fostering collaboration to make really thoughtful, solution-oriented suggestions. And also, I believe that we have a lot of experts in our community who know what works really well and what has worked well. And I think we need to honor some of those pieces of wisdom as well as we move forward with new areas we're innovating. And so I truly believe that it's a great opportunity to really think about how to pull our city together around some common priorities. I do believe that one of our common priorities is our children and families, but I believe we have other things we're concerned about: our infrastructure, our public spaces, how we are able to come together as community should there be challenges outside of Beverly that affect how we can function, whether that's at the state level or federal level. And so as a locally focused leader, I would be looking at how we are impacted locally and making sure that we are collaborating and having those coalitions locally and asking those outside of our sphere of influence how they can support us locally. And by doing that, we can focus on the problems at hand and ensure that we look to each other with civil discourse, respectfully, and as neighbors. I think we can do that. And I think that it's really important that we stay focused on those goals and focused on how we can continue to build those connections between and amongst each other. So thank you.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this evening. And as I mentioned, if you've got a comment, send me an email. Or if you've got a longer comment, there's always room for you here at the table. Thanks again for joining us, and stay tuned.